Welcome to the ORICL class of October the 9th, 2023. Yet even more stories of the secret city. We're happy to have you with us this morning. I'll remind you to keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking, and use your speaker view to see a large image of the person speaking. And remember, you can make that bigger by just dragging the line between what's being shown and the person. Or if it's just a speaker talking, you'll have that person in larger view. Use the gallery view to see everyone, and use chat to enter questions. I'll try to monitor that. You can send it to everyone or to me privately. And of course, an alternate method, and really just as good, is just to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. I've got two guests with us this morning, and either one of them would be happy for you to interrupt their talk and ask them any questions you want. Today we've got Steve Goodpasture and Ralph Martin with us, and they'll be talking about wheat and before wheat. Ralph's going to go back even before the wheat time and talk to us a little bit there. So let me stop sharing. And then we've got all of us up here where we can see it. And we'll start, Ralph, with you. If you want to tell us a little bit about the area that's known as wheat, or was up until 42, still is, and because of primarily Steve Goodpasture, and we'll let him talk in a little bit. But tell us a little bit about the early times, Ralph.
Okay, I'll start with my background just to show you how I connect. I'm 8th generation in Roane County through my mother, and I'm 7th generation Anderson County through my father. And all these go back to the first settlers of both Anderson and Roane. And a lot of my grandfathers are from local counties, also Jefferson and Blount. But my mother was born there off of Lonsville Road there, across the street from the Young Presbyterian Church. And the house is gone there now, but there is a descendant of the Roberts that used to maintain that cemetery there at the Young Church. And he was the one that was letting me know about the house that was tore down there where my mother was born. But my mother's lineage goes from there to Crow, Harriet Crow, who married Samuel Houston Crow. They're buried at the Tennessee Missionary Baptist Church there in Kingston. And then Harriet's parents were the Roberts, Margaret Roberts. And then the Robbie Roberts, which his name was Elias, he was named after his grandfather, is buried right beside her there. And he was in the Civil War, I think in the 7th Cavalry Union. And then his father was John Calvin Roberts, who is buried at the K-25 site, the Roberts Cemetery, which we've been researching for years. Steve Goodpasture first put us onto it. I think it was in 2014. We went out and visited the site after the tower had been torn down. And then John Calvin's father was Elias Roberts, and he was in the Revolutionary War. I have 28 records from the Revolutionary War where he fought under Nathaniel Gist in several battles, Brandywine, and a few others, and eventually went down in 1780 to Charleston with the Continental Army. He was a Continental Ranger. And of course, as history goes, the Charleston fell to the British in May of 1780. And I always wondered how Elias Roberts got from Pennsylvania to Roane County. And doing my research, I thought that he would have died on a prison ship there after being captured at Charleston. The officers were always traded during the Revolution, but the enlisted men were always held captive. They either died of scurvy on those prison ships or smallpox or other reasons. So, and his 3-year term was up there in May of 1780. So they just don't discharge you from the military because you're under siege or whatever by Cornwallis in Charleston. So I really was wondering if this was my Elias Roberts until I found a grand jury document 3 months later with his name on it in Beaufort District, just south of Charleston. I'll never know exactly how he survived the siege and the battle, or he may have deserted, or maybe he discharged, I don't know. But anyway, he ended up at Pendleton District, further inland, on George's Creek with a farm. And this is where he met his wife, Rebecca Brashears, because she and Nancy, her sister, was living with her father, Robert Samuel Brashears, there across George's Creek. So now the history of Robert Samuel Brashears, let me back up on him a little bit. He was living up on Reedy Creek in Kingsport before Kingsport existed, of course, in the late 1770s. He was part of the Watauga settlement that was illegally there because King George had deemed that none of his people, subjects, were to be living across the Appalachian Mountains. That's to keep from stirring up the Cherokee and him having to put more soldiers into the war. But Robert Samuel Brashears went with John Sevier to the Battle of Kings Mountain in October of 1780. And that was the turning point of the American Revolution, deemed by a lot of our presidents and historians, with 1780 was really a bad time for the American cause of independence. Benedict Arnold had been discovered as a traitor, and just many things. There was revolts within the ranks. George Washington even had to establish firing squads and shoot some of his men to set an example of that you just can't do what you want to do. You got to do what your commanders say. So anyway, on October 7th, after the defeat of Patrick Ferguson at the Battle of Kings Mountain, there was a few more battles. There was the Cowpens battle, which was another victory for the colonists, and then eventually Cornwallis had to go to Yorktown to be resupplied, which didn't work out too well when the French put up their barricade, and British could not resupply Cornwallis, and the French came in and also aided in the defeat of Cornwallis. And so that was pretty much the end of the major battles of the American Revolution. So that's a little bit of the history of Robert Samuel Brashears, because he and Elias Roberts, after he had married Rebecca, and Elias's brother Zacchaeus, who married Nancy, so the two brothers married the two sisters, they came to Roane County, which was Knox County at the time, in 1794, and lived on Sugar Grove Valley. Now, eventually, later in the 1790s, Elias purchased the property there along Poplar Creek in the Clinch River that became the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant. In 1806, Elias was killed, supposedly, I haven't really found confirmation of this, by Native Americans. Could have been Creek or Cherokee, as the Creek was active with the Cherokee in the Chickamauga area, as the massacre of Cabot Station proves, when 1,000 Braves came up and massacred the Cabot family up off Walker Springs. But anyway, Elias was apparently the first person buried in the Roberts Cemetery there at the K-25 side. Now, a lot of this information that we have is from Snyder Roberts, who was a high school history teacher at Clinton High School. And he was teaching when I went there and graduated in 71, but I never had him as a teacher. My sister had him, but he wrote a book, and the book, oh gosh, I left it upstairs. But anyway, it was about the Robert Cemetery, and had an interview with it from a man that actually was a child that used to swim around Granny's Bluff, as they called it. And it was, he described to Snyder about how he used to walk up to the cemetery and describe the headstones to Snyder. Now, in Snyder's time, the headstones were already gone. And the best I can figure that the headstones disappeared before the Manhattan Project. The Browders had purchased the property from Rebecca Brashears in 1850. Well, from the family, she passed away in 1859, and the Robert family was still being buried there for many decades, and then eventually the headstones disappeared. And I have the photographs from the aerial photographs from World War II, where they surveyed the area, high definition photos, and the headstones did not exist before the project started. And so therefore, apparently they were cleared out during the possession of the Browders when they lived there. So that's, and then when we got involved with Steve Goodpasture down there in 2014, it took me a couple of years to spend the time to start looking more into the cemetery. And I had since then learned how to douse for graves, and went down one morning with Steve, and I found 45 graves there right beside the pylons where the water tower used to stand. And I not only did the dousing myself, I brought a friend of mine that taught me how to douse, Boyd Smith. And he was well-known douser at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Anytime they suspected human remains, they would bring him in to douse to determine if there was a cemetery and any other information you could get from dowsing. So then we was wanting to establish a monument there at the site, but we had some resistance from the Department of Energy. So we did some ground penetrating radar, which I have a report that I gave to Ray that did detect some graves on the further western end of the cemetery, as the eastern end had dirt filled on it. And as our dowsing rods indicated, those graves were like 9 feet deep. So the ground penetrating radar didn't really pick up all the graves that the dowsing rods picked up. But as a compromise with the Department of Energy and Crowett, we placed the 3-ton limestone monument at the George Jones Memorial Baptist Church with a history of the family and their children of Zacchaeus and Elias. Now, Zacchaeus is buried across the Clinch River from where the Poplar Creek enters. And that grave site was mentioned or listed in the TVA map during the Watts Bar impoundment as the Robert Cemetery. So that one's marked very well. Now, the one that's at the K25 site there of Elias's cemetery, all it says is one grave. So that was from the TVA people that went in and surveyed that before. Of course, that was a decade or two before the Manhattan Project. So that we do have confirmation that the grave site's there. There's a layout yard for K25 there now. So actually the best site for the memorial stone was at the George Jones Memorial Baptist Church. And I could also mention that Nathaniel Gist, who was the commander of Elias Roberts, and his name is on all 28 records of Elias, he was father of Sequoia. And I have a letter from George Washington to Nathaniel Gist to form 3 regiments of Continental Rangers. And one of those units was to be entirely of Cherokee Braves, no more than 500 to be in the regiment. But the Cherokee went with the British, aligned with the British side, so therefore that regiment never did get formed. But the other 2, it may have been 4 regiments that he was supposed to have formed, and the other 3 got dispersed through the other Continental armies in different areas. And I think Elias was with the Virginia group. I'd have to go back and look again exactly who Nathaniel, who was assigned to as Continental Ranger. So that's pretty much the story of how Elias got from northern Pennsylvania. And Zacchaeus was also, and he got involved earlier than Elias. He was in South Carolina as a ranger and fought in Utah Springs and several other battles. And he was also a ranger in the South Carolina Rangers down there. Now, how they ever connected after the Revolutionary War, I don't know. That's a mystery too, how they knew where each other were. Their communications, they must have had a base of family somewhere, their parents or somebody that they wrote to, and they communicated back and told them, hey, your brother's down there in Pendleton District. But anyway, Zacchaeus married Nancy several years after Elias had remarried Rebecca.
All right. So that says that we have 2 Revolutionary War soldier veterans, one buried on the other side of the Clinch in the Robert Cemetery, and also one buried on the K-25 site where the water tower once stood. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's also several veterans of the War of 1812. The son of Elias was involved in the War of 1812, John Calvin, which is my 3X great grandfather. Elias is 4X, and then Robbie is my 2X, and he was in the Union Army. So I'd like to also mention these people were Quakers. It's on the stone there at the Wheat Cemetery. So they're supposed to have been a peaceful religion, but these were called the Fighting Quakers. So and they all went Union, and they were anti-slavery. Being Quakers, they were anti-slavery.
Okay, very good. Well, do any of you others here have any questions for Ralph? If you do, just unmute yourself and ask away. I don't see anything in the chat. I'll give you just a minute if you've got any questions for Ralph. Ralph, it's not unusual for these folks to be quiet. They like to they don't often speak up, but here's one. Please say more about dowsing. Talk about that a little bit, Ralph.
Well, the dowsing is very interesting, and nobody ever questions about dowsing for water. And I think that a lot of our ancestors, pioneers, as they traveled, they used dowsing to find their water. You only go 3 days without water. So if you get away from East Tennessee, where the water is so plentiful, you're going to have to learn how to douse. And one of my main questions during my historical travels was at the massacre at Cabot Station, they had a blockhouse at the top of the hill at Walker Springs. But the blockhouse was a long way, several hundred yards or further, quarter of a mile, from where the blockhouse was set up, where the massacre established. And so I had to wonder, why would you set up a blockhouse so far from the water? Blockhouses are built for safety. You can always store water, but if you're under siege, you run out of water. Well, me and Boyd Smith was up there one day, and we started dowsing for water. You can also find old buildings that are missing with these dowsing rods, by the way. So I had already found the building and laid it out, the blockhouse. And then Boyd Smith found the stream, two streams of water that connected together right at the corner where the house was established. So apparently they had dug a well, and the well access was inside and outside of the blockhouse.
Mhm.
So if you were out wanting to set up a settlement, you need to find water if you don't have a natural spring. And that's apparently what they did at the blockhouse there at Cabot Station. Now, if you ask any utility person, electrical or water, working in the cities or in the county, they will have dowsing rods, and they will find their electrical conduit or the water. The rods will distinguish between the two. And you can tell if water is flowing or if water is stagnant, if it's just sitting there. You can walk over a bridge with those rods and the water's running, they will turn outwards. And if you walk over a bridge where the water's just sitting there, they will turn inwards. So it's the same with a water line. If the water is not running in a water line, it will turn inwards as it's stagnant and just sitting there. But if you crack that valve just a little bit, where it's just a drip or two, it only takes that much, they'll turn outwards. So they use it a lot to find underground water leaks. So now moving on to the grave dowsing, I'd already started dowsing a little bit for graves. And when I was introduced to Boyd Smith, and he said, "Have you been talking to the rods? Have you learned to talk to them yet?" So I said, "Okay, Boyd, you need to be committed. This is insane," which is the same answer I get when I ask people, "Have you started talking to the rods yet?" Because after Boyd taught me how to actually get answers from the rods, I started using it, and it's very useful. You can determine the sex of the grave. You can determine how deep the grave is. And you can do that in several ways. You can actually dangle the rod over a grave with your finger, and it's got to be loose. The rods, even when you hold them in your hand, they've got to be as loose as possible and still maintain them. But to determine the sex, if you hold the sex over the torso of the person's remains, it will either turn clockwise or counterclockwise. And this is how a lot of people determine pregnant people's the sex of the child. They would hold a needle with a thread over the stomach area, and it's clockwise or counterclockwise to determine. So it's used in more ways than one, but the clockwise is the male and the counterclockwise is the female. And then I'll give an example of Elias Robbie Roberts. It's buried at Missionary Baptist Church in Kingston, Tennessee Missionary. I doused his feet and put a flag in, and then went to his head, and where the rods crossed, I put it in his head, and I measured the distance, and it was 5 feet 8 inches. Excuse me. So I went to his Civil War records, and it gave his height as 5 feet 8 inches. I mean, I can spend you hours just telling you how accurate that these dowsing rods are if you know how to use them.
Hey Ray, let me open my share.
Okay. I've lost your audio, Steve.
Okay, now
I got you. Now share your screen.
How do I?
It's down at the bottom, share screen. Now
Okay,
go find what you want to show and click on it.
Okay, is that, well, I've got, okay, hold on, let me get, well, I did that.
All right, now
I had oh, here it is, here it is.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me go down. I've got,
okay, we got the church now, yeah.
Okay.
There you are.
There he is. This is Ralph back in I guess it was 2017 we did this, Ralph. This is him dowsing for Elias Roberts' grave right here.
Huh.
And if you'll notice, if you'll notice these rods, they're not crossed. But if we go to the next one, they're crossed, and he's just stepped on a grave.
Wow. Huh.
So this was when we were out there doing that, and I had put together some of everything he was talking about. I should have been going through where we were, because he mentioned several things. This is where we are at the K-25 site, and this is the tower that he's talking about, the 352-foot, 4,000-gallon firewater tower, and the red square is where he was dousing to find the cemetery, and that's where he found it there.
Steve, that right, go back to that one.
Yes.
That little right down in the lower right, is that still there today?
No, they've removed that. All of that's gone.
Oh, that's gone.
Yeah. Now, what's there, as you can see in this photo, are the base for each one of the legs. They're still there.
Oh, the base for the legs of the water tower is still there then.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that'll locate the cemetery for us. All right.
Yeah, this gives a better view. There's the tower in relation to the whole plant.
Yeah.
And then he mentioned this is the flyover, and you can see where this is the circle shows where the cemetery was, and this was all farmland. This is the Browder farm at the time when this picture was taken. So it's all big one field. And then he mentioned this map by TVA, and right in the middle of that little circle is the cross, and underneath it, it says, I forget, one or two grave. It says one grave, and this was the TVA map for the back when they started doing Watts Bar, backing up Watts Bar.
Now let me ask you to leave that there. Move your pointer right down to Poplar Creek.
Yeah, this is Poplar Creek. It runs around.
All right, comes on around, and there's where it joins the Clinch River.
Right here.
Right across from there is where the Roberts Cemetery is, right?
Yes, that's where Zacchaeus is, and I put some. This is a close-up of it. There you go. That's a close-up. Says Roberts Cemetery, and it has two graves on it. But and this is what it looked like back in 2017.
Okay.
The house, the fence surrounds the cemetery where Zacchaeus is buried, and the house stood over in this area. Okay. It was right in the yard.
Yeah.
There's a better one. You can see at that time there was just one field stone and inside the fencing. But Ralph's has gone back and he's replaced the fencing. This was taken this year. And here he mentioned that he put flags down. Well, that's what these orange flags, when he doused this area, he found a boy and a young girl in there as well. And here's the headstone for Zacchaeus and Nancy that he has placed in there. So you can walk back there and find these this grave. And Ralph has done a real good job of getting all this together. Putting these monuments. I wanted to show this. This is Campbell Station, Campbell Bend, which we were just looking at. But in relationship, here's Robert Brashier's grave, which is over on Sugar Grove Valley. So he mentioned Robert being their father-in-law, and he is buried within the area. So we have Robert here. We have Zacchaeus on here, right here in the bend here, and then Elias right here next to the K-31 building.
Excellent. That really locates it well. Ralph, you've done a good job identifying these historic cemeteries that are there and the people in them.
Well, another thing is if you do happen to walk over to where let's see, if you go on Google Earth, it even has the Roberts Cemetery identified.
Okay.
On Google Earth, if you zoom in on it. But also, besides there's the well is over there, and something else that's in the area right there are all these stone walls.
Huh.
They're out there. lots of them. There's one that goes from the house all the way to the river. You can follow it all the way to the river. And so there's plenty. It's a neat archaeological area to go see. And with Ralph highlighting everything, especially the cemetery there, it's a destination. It's a thing to go back and find it if you don't mind walking through the woods.
Mm-hmm. Is there a trail you can follow?
There is a road that you can go. Let's see, I'll show you. You can see Rarity Ridge down here.
Yeah.
You go into Rarity Ridge, and if you follow this dirt road, they just put this in this year. That's a big drainage for some reason. You get back here, and there's a dirt road that goes up, and when you get right here, you can park and follow a road, an old road out to the house. Well, to the cemetery. You have to look around for it. You just follow the path and just get out there in this grassy area and start looking for it, and you'll find the cemetery. Of course, it'd help if you had Google Earth and could zoom in and it would give you an idea of where you're headed. So, but it is an interesting place. It's too bad you can't get back to the site where Elias was buried here. I had a picture of the monument that he put. This is the monument he put in memory of the Roberts family. And it has the story that he just told, a brief story of Elias and Zacchaeus on the monument. And it's right beside the church. So it's easy to find.
All right.
It's in the edge of the cemetery.
Ralph, anything else you want to add, or any of these images you want to say anything more about?
I'll just add that both families are listed in the first book, or First Families of Tennessee, and it's a real good genealogy book. And I understand that there's been some more volumes come out since the first one that came out after the World Fair Expo 82. But it's got listed people that have joined the First Families of Tennessee under their name. So I guess this latest version, if you look it up, you'll find that I'm listed under the Elias Roberts, and I never did join through Robert Samuel Brashears. I should have. But Robert Samuel Brashears was a rolling stone. He lived in every colony, Williamsburg, I think Jamestown, and he actually in the book that I have, there's about 8 volumes of it, but one is specifically about him, and it's the biggest one. He had owned 800 acres in Baltimore County, which is now the city of Baltimore. But and I'll also add too there to find Zacchaeus's grave. If you want to go in by boat, I have gone in up the Clinch and came to the mouth of Poplar Creek, and just park your boat directly across the river where Poplar Creek, and you can walk right up in not far, 100 yards or so, right up to the home site.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, if you find the stone wall, you can follow it all the way to the home site.
Yes.
It goes right into the water right there.
So getting up there by boat is the easiest way to find it, isn't it?
Yeah, unless you want to do a lot of walking, it's a lot of walking. I have taken the 4-wheeler back there to carry all the building materials to put the fences and the stones up. Had an old trailer I pulled back there, and I have taken my 4-wheel drive back there to take some stuff out. But there's been a lot of trees down since then. The road's not been kept maintained.
Yeah. So it's cleared now. There's nothing in the road. If you don't mind getting your vehicle, the side of it scratched,
right,
with some of the trees that have grown, but you can get back there now. It winds around, the road goes around the point, takes a long way around, and you go by the McKinney Cemetery over here, but you got to be looking because it is it's grown up very bad right now.
yeah.
You might want to mention, while we're talking about Robert, who else is in Roberts over there in that cemetery where Robert's buried?
there at the K-31 building.
No, at Robert Brashear's over on Sugar Grove. The
Oh,
cemetery.
yeah. Yeah.
There's some other famous people in there.
It's called the Brashear Cries Cemetery, but there's the Ladds are buried there, and they're the great grandparents of Howard Baker.
Ah,
And I was told that. And so I did Howard Baker's genealogy. That's what I always do when I get a familiar name I want to know more about. I run their genealogy all the way through. And I discovered his grandmother was a Cox that married the Ladd. Now, they're not, his grandparents aren't buried there. It's his great grandparent Ladds. But the son of the ones buried there in the Brashear Cemetery married a Cox, which runs back through my line, which makes me Howard Baker's fifth cousin. Not that that means anything, but it's just interesting to tie when I see a familiar name.
yeah.
Kurt Cox fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain, and he's buried off North Freeway off Pedigo Road. He's got a monument there, and he married Susanna Overton, and it's a brother of Joseph Overton that moved here in 1799 in the Brushy Valley here in Anderson County, and that's my fourth great grandfather. So that's, I always try to make these connections, but that is Howard Baker's great grandparents are buried in that Brashear Cemetery, and a lot of Civil War soldiers buried there too that are Roberts and Brashears.
And the woman, the sheriff.
Oh yeah, his grandmother, Howard Baker's grandmother, and I can't remember her first name. She was a Cox, but her husband was sheriff of Roane County, and when he died, she finished up his term. I don't know how they worked that out, but she was known as the first sheriff of Roane County, and actually had, I think it was some bank robbers somehow that she searched down and had arrested. So there's a story behind that also.
Yeah, the first woman sheriff.
Yeah, in Roane County. All right. Very good. Anyone else have any other questions for Ralph?
One. How about this one? Was Collins related to Elias or Zacchaeus? He's Collins Roberts, the one that settled Robertsville.
I have researched that, and I cannot make the connection definitively. I have researched other Roberts line like Purnell Roberts, and there's a World War II veteran that was killed in a battle, and there's USS Roberts ship was named after him. And I've researched them, and that's when I see a Roberts name, I always research them. So Robertsville was a big curiosity, and I could not make a connection. That does not mean that they're not related as a cousin. And it has to be a cousin, though. It's not a direct descendant, I don't believe.
So, Steve, I have I've had Dennis Egert do the research on Robertsville, and he has determined that Collins Roberts was not the founder of Robertsville.
Uh-oh, okay.
I'm going to
Interesting.
go, yeah, I'm going to go and show what he says about that in the second part of the Robertsville presentation. I can either jump to that now, or I can let you all continue if you've got any more you want to share, and then I'll do it before we end. Is there anything else you want to share about this area before the wheat area?
Well, this is what I put together for today. I didn't have any extra on wheat.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if Ralph was going to make it, so I kind of
Right.
put this together, but it supports everything he said exactly
yeah,
that he mentioned. So
yeah, and I appreciate you doing that, because I think having those visuals help. Now, if you'll stop your share, unless you've got anything else you want to say now.
nope, no, that's it. That's all.
Well, you and Ralph have done a good job. Before we leave that, is any other questions you all have of Ralph or Steve?
I will add one more thing about the dowsing.
Okay.
When you run out of the paperwork, because you can't get answers. So I can actually stand over Zacchaeus's grave, and I've located Elias's grave there at the K31 building, but I can stand over Zacchaeus's grave, and the rods will give you a yes or no answer. You can't get an explanation, just a yes or no. And I'll ask, are you the brother of the Elias Roberts that's buried across the river? And the rods will respond immediately, yes.
All right. The person that asked the question about dowsing, and here's from Sandy. There a book, let me get this. Is there a book that discusses the Howard Baker grandparents, sheriff of Roane County? That story, Steve and Ralph, is there any where that's written down in a book?
I can't remember where I found that information, whether it was on the internet or I was doing some genealogy and I ran upon the story of his grandmother. That's probably where I found it, was doing genealogy, and it was referred to in her genealogy files.
I got it.
But
I think I Googled something about the first sheriff, and I think they listed First Lady Sheriff in Tennessee, and it gave a story about her that's buried there in the Brashear cemetery. The lady.
So is she buried there also then?
Well, that's what it said. The first sheriff. I assume it was the same lady you're talking about.
Yes.
I thought she was a lad though.
Well, she was born a lad, but
Okay.
no, she was born a Cox and married a lad.
That's it. She was, and I think the story I read was that her husband was killed in the line of duty, and she took over. She caught the killer, and she took over as sheriff. They let her run the rest of his term out. So
okay, it wasn't a bank
That's the
robbery;
story.
it was a murder. Okay,
yeah, well, that's and it was his murder, her husband. So, but I don't know how much of that is, fable or truth, but that's what's on the web, so it must be true.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right. Any other questions for Steve or for Ralph? All right. If there's none there, let me
Well, I had one to comment to Ralph. I did not realize, Ralph, you said you graduated in 71 from Clinton.
Yes.
We go a lot farther back than I thought we did. I graduated from Clinton in 71. So we
I'm gonna have to pull my annual
more
out.
stuff out, buddy.
Well, I noticed you living in a log house, and I'm sitting in a log house.
I do, yeah.
Oh,
on Sugar Grove Valley, no less. So
yeah, we may have more in common. We know, because we end up being cousins.
That may be.
I hear you.
And that's one of the curses of life. You can't choose who you're related to.
All right.
All right, let's go. If there's no more questions, we're going to talk about the second part of the history of Robertsville just a little bit. And again, this is from Dennis Egert and Fred Eiler that provided this to me, starting in 1800. Now, we covered all the way back to the very start. Those are the references that we wrote this, or they wrote it, and I published it in Historically Speaking. If you just go online and look for Historically Speaking Ray Smith, you'll find all of these listed chronologically. These were published in 2022 in 7/11, 7/18, and 7/25. So you can get all of this written information that talks about the Robertsville area. And again, Dennis and Fred provided it for me. Obviously, the project changed everything, but he's taken time to do the research to get that information that we're at to today. So let's talk about this. They're putting in families coming in after 1800. And they talk about the Tennells. In 1809, Hollins Roberts immediately established himself as a successful local merchant and continued to expand his wealth. He married Sarah Gallagher in 1813, and Sarah was from the influential family that settled the Wheat Valley. Collins is certainly one of the more colorful and controversial individuals who lived here, but we'll see he often had tumultuous relationship, not only with his wife, but also with some of his neighbors. Now, by the early decades, Robertsville became a self-sufficient community. There were 4 mills in the adjacent Scarborough community, and to the west of Robertsville, there's a salt well, Winter's Gap, which is now Oliver Spring. The Jacob Peak, Douglas Oliver, and Collins Roberts became the wealthiest citizens in the community. Samuel Worthington had died. His 600-acre estate had been subdivided. Douglas Oliver's original purchase of 140 acres in 1803 would go to 1,268 acres. Just before his death, he owned the land from the top of Black Oak Ridge to Pine Ridge. So that would be the area that's now Oak Ridge City, was once owned by Oliver. He also owned a moonshine still. The spring that fed his still is the same spring that feeds the municipal swimming pool today. Upon his death in 1843, one creditor owed his estate 50 gallons of moonshine. His estate was subdivided into 5 sections. 4 were sold, 1 retained by the family, and Amelia continued to live in the parcel. 1805, Jacob Peak made his first purchase of 50 acres along East Fork of Poplar Creek. He expanded it over time, and at his death, he owned 900 acres located in Gamble Valley and a portion of what is now downtown Oak Ridge. After Douglas Oliver died in 1843, Jacob bought his distillery equipment, supplies, and it was located at the spring of the hill where Peak Cemetery is located today. Jacob Peak is buried there. However, there's no grave marker to identify his exact interment. Now, that's over in Scarborough today. The most recognized citizen of historic Robertson is Collins Roberts. Although he may not have been the original founding patriarch, he was certainly an influential citizen who also may have played a role in naming his community. To create a named community in the old days, a person of influence would apply to have a post office. And of course, naming it would be up to the discretion of the applicant. That's what Collins Roberts did. Using his clout, the Robertsville Post Office was created in 1832. It certainly helped his mercantile trade to have the post office in his store. The first postmaster was Clark Crozier. Robertsville postal area grew to include Elsa, Lupton, Crossroads, and even Scarborough. He was a merchant and a farmer, and he amassed a fortune. Be about $670,000 today. Apparently, he had some turbulent relationship. From the court records, they found an incident in 1841 with Isaac Friels, and he decided to take matters in his own hands. Brothers Isaac Friels and brothers laid siege to the Roberts homestead. By 10 o'clock, they heard the commotion outside. Looking out, they saw a nearby fodder stack on fire. Then they began shouting, throwing rocks, banging sticks against the house. And as they stood by, Roberts barricaded himself in the back of the room with a firearm, vowing to defend money or die by it. Court's records indicated he claimed he had $10,000. The lady saw a hand slip onto the front door and attempt to lift it off its hinges in order to make entry. And the neighbors survived. The assailants made a hasty retreat. Now, this is in notable Southern families, and it shows some of the people that we've been talking about. He's underlined, they moved to Anderson County, Tennessee. The town of Robertsville was named for the family. Now, this is where he brings up the question of whether it was named for Collins Roberts or it was named for the son of Reuben and Mary Miller Asher Roberts. And they moved. Then if you go back and find out who was they, it's talking about James Roberts and Betsy Tunnell and that group. The Roberts family, for whom the town of Robertsville was named. Now, and this shows you where those farms were: Douglas Oliver, Jacob Peak, and Tunnell, Collins Roberts. And that's what they showed the acreage around the family. Now, this is 1850 to 1880, continued to grow, and Collins Roberts' wealth did. He faced a legal dilemma, challenges his mental competence. A jury report signed by 12 Robertsville jurors was presented to Anderson County Court, duly summoned and sworn to inquire into the mental condition of Collins Roberts. Having fully investigated the matter, find he is a lunatic and incapable of managing his affairs with safety to himself and others. We also find there's a danger if he should go unrestrained in his committing violence on his wife, perhaps other members of his family, and also upon his slaves. We further find that he possessed a large amount of real and personal property with which we have not had time and opportunity to, and with any exacting or certainty. So these are the people that signed that. No action was taken from this jury report. The 1860 census indicates Collins Roberts retained all his personal real estate and assets. Now, moving on, the relationship deteriorated between Collins and his wife. They were living separately. Just before the Civil War in 1860, Robertsville had a population of 840 people. Decrease in population, and many Robertsville families lost money, according to him, along those times. Not only did the economy suffer, but also the divided political loyalties created hardships. Just after the Civil War, there was a return home, and being the son of he also was a grandson of Collins Roberts, been paroled from his service after surrender to the Union forces. And as Ralph said, there was a lot of Union support in this area for the Civil War. 3 Union soldiers executed Ethelbert, unclear. Grievance letter to the provost marshal. And then they tore his pardon up, threw it on the ground, and walked away after they killed him. These 3 Union soldiers were believed to be assigned to the 9th Tennessee Union Cavalry, operating in the area, rounding up Confederate bushwhackers and irregulars. Was more than a revenge killing. The 3 Union soldiers hated the Confederate until served in, and had no doubt influenced their actions. That's some of the things that were taking place here in Robertsville during that time. Goes into more detail about Abiah Crozier, and 3 unknown people killed. The 3 soldiers were identified and arrested, and they didn't produce anything, so they got by with it. Anyone found with arms out of authority was treated as a public enemy and as an outlaw, and be killed like a mad dog by anyone who meets them. After the investigation, there was not enough evidence to convict them, obviously. And this is interesting. Robertsville can boast of having the first African-American school in Anderson County, named the Whittier School. It was located on the crest of Pine Ridge, just north of where South Illinois Avenue crosses the ridge. The land for the school was donated by Andrew Freeman, a freed slave, and they had the school and church as a token for his high regard for the religious interests of this county, desire for the instruction and elevation of his race. Opened in 1870, $1 per student per month. Had 21 students. And funding came from collection of poll taxes. This is where Collins Roberts is buried, and that's a very poor picture of his tombstone. It's under that old cedar tree and hard to get a picture, but it's buried in Robertsville Baptist Church graveyard in Oak Ridge. And for those of you who might be interested, I just recently learned the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. A graveyard is a burial place that has a church associated with it. A cemetery is not associated with a church. There's a little tidbit of information for you that you probably can stack up as having learned today. After 1875, the Oak Grove Academy, located in Robertsville, was chartered, came known as the Robertsville Academy. In 83, they signed a contract with Henry for the use of the well on his property. The land also includes the spring that today feeds the Oak Ridge swimming pool. And well was a spring, yeah. Perhaps the stone house was a storage facility. The Robertsville Academy would have been located somewhere nearby present-day Grove Center. And most people are not aware that it was a school there. After 1879, more progress, the Robertsville High School was built. We've all made a mistake here. Wood Chapel it doesn't have an S on it. His name was Wood, and Elijah Wood, I believe. Yes, Elijah Wood was an African-American Union Civil War veteran, served in the U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery Regiment, and he put the school and the church, which is now up on West Outer Drive in Michigan, at Cedar Grove Park. It's just one tombstone, and it's in a person's yard there. You can see it as you drive by that intersection I guess that's Outer Drive and Michigan Avenue. Original Robertsville land barons got the now you see I didn't know the difference when I wrote this or when I edited what Dennis had wrote. The Baptist church should have been graveyard, located behind Willowbrook. And now we go to the legend of the buried Robertsville gold. Legendary Collins Robert buried gold hoard, persisted through times and even been written about. In George Robinson's book, The Oak Ridge Story, he reveals that just before the Civil War, Collins Roberts decided to quietly sell his slaves, accepting only gold coins for payment. Being leery of thievery and banks, Collins buried his gold. Shortly afterwards, in 1860, he died, taking the location of his buried treasure with him, just before the Civil War. Okay. And how much wealth did Collins Robert have in 1860, and what happened to it? According to the 1860 census, his real estate was valued at $25,000, personal estate at $300,000, and today that's $10 million. From 1860 federal slave census, we know that Collins Roberts owned 40 slaves. No documentation exists revealing their fate. No will for Collins Roberts has been found, nor does it appear that his children received his inheritance. Then it goes into son James died in 1862. And in 1867, there was a will indicating that he left some land in Dutch Valley. And okay, it appears that Collins Roberts' wealth is unaccounted. Whereabouts of his wealth became local legend. People came from all over the South searching for his elusive treasure. The stories of Collins Roberts' buried gold persisted even up to the time the government condemned the land in 1942. Local historian John Rice Irwin told me of a memory he had. As a young boy living there, he also heard stories of this buried gold. John remembered a meeting held by the government in which the local citizens were told of the impending purchase of their need to immediately vacate. In desperation to keep his land, one concerned citizen asked the government official, "What about the buried gold?" Everyone knew that this question was futile, and his concern was ignored. So this is Dennis talking. Some time ago, I visited John Rice Irwin, who at the time was living in assisted living. Although his body was frail, his mind was still sharp as a tack. Our conversation ultimately turned to what John knew about the Collins Roberts buried gold. John told me that as a kid living in this community, he too had personally searched for it. At that point, I questioned John where it could be. He stated that he was told by his neighbors of two likely places. The first place was a dip atop East Fork Ridge. Standing at Robertsville High School, now Robertsville Middle School, it would be due south as a compass points to the East Fork Ridge location. The second location John told me was near the site of the old Collins Roberts homestead, which today is at the western intersection of Robertsville and Raleigh roads. At that point, John drew a map for me, giving greater detail. As he drew the map, his eyes lit up as though he was still living here in this bygone era. Somewhere, he said, as he pointed to an area on the map, is where the gold was buried. He added, standing in front of the Collins Roberts home, you could throw a stone up a rise, and within this stone throw was where the gold was buried. John, I said, that would be somewhere behind present-day Inca Circle. He just smiled and said, that's what I was told. My thanks to Fred Eiler for his assistance and research of this article, and Charlie Manning for sharing his research, and Ron Raymond for creating the map used in this article. Now, this is the map that he provided for me. Shows the high school and where the Roberts home was, the church, the roads, and says that's where the gold is. Now, I don't think it's ever been found, so that's what John Rice Irwin drew for Dennis. If any of you want to follow and look in that area, you're welcome to. History of Robertsville has once been unknown and been speculated for some time. The buried gold is but one aspect of the unknown nature of the history. Dennis Egert and Fred Eiler, I misspelled Eiler, done a great job digging out the details I've shared with you here. And then there was the murder mystery that we had last time with Mark Griffith. So remember that I told you I would bring you that story, and we did. Now let me stop the share and ask if there are any questions or any comments that you all would like to make about what we presented today. You've got a lot about wheat, some pre-wheat, and a little bit about Robertsville. What are your comments or questions? Well, we've even bored them to death, or they don't count it by what we've shared. I really do appreciate everyone being with us, and I hope that you've enjoyed what we've shared with you. Again, I encourage you, if you've got any comments or questions, to take advantage of the last few minutes, please.
Well, I just think it's been fascinating as a distant relative of John Rice Irwin's. I would like to go search out some of those places, particularly the cemetery of the Civil War veterans that's on Michigan and West Outer. That would be fun to find. So thank you for the information.
Bet. And that one now of Elijah Wood,
Yeah.
that's easily found. It's in the corner lot of the
Okay.
section, and you can literally see it as you're driving by on Outer Drive. Just look, if you're going west, look to your east, if you're or your left. And again, if you're going east on Outer Drive, it'll be on your right at that intersection.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting to hear all this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments?
I'll tell you a little bit more history about probably people not interested in my family that much, but when my mother was living there across from Lawnsville,
yeah,
they packed up and moved to where in front of where the federal building is located right now. And the house was right there in front of where the post office is located. And my mother told me stories. Of course, she was young, 4 or 5 years old and underfoot. So they'd always give her a little quart bucket to go down to the creek in front of the federal building to dip water to bring back to the house. This was in like 1922 or 23. My grandmother died giving childbirth to her last child, Jean Worley Wise, there at that house. My grandfather was a farmer. He actually had a strawberry patch right where the hospital is standing right now. And they moved from there to Clinton, and that's where my mother met my father. But that's just an interesting little story there, that area right there. And of the high resolution photographs that the military did in 1942, I located that house that was there where the post office is located.
That's good. And for those that might not know, there was an effort to identify all of those buildings and structures that were there prior to the Manhattan Project. And those images were placed in the National Archives down in Atlanta. And Don Raby went down there and scanned all of those images and put it in a software package. He had several CDs of it. And those are now at the Oak Ridge Public Library. And Mike Stello has actually, for a long time, we couldn't get to Don's images anymore because he put it on a little piece of software that got outdated. But Mike has been able to get those off, and now he has them available that you can get them through the library. And I'm hoping that he's going to post that online so anybody can have access to it. But it's pictures of all of the buildings that were here at the time that the Manhattan Project took nearly 60,000 acres. All of those buildings were documented by photographs. And I think that's an excellent resource that Don created for us. And now I hope we can get it to where everyone can have easy access to it. Any other questions or comments? Steve, anything more you want to share with us, or Ralph?
Oh,
I've got one more short story. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I'm done. I'm tapped out.
Appreciate it, Steve. Now finish up with us, Ralph. We got 4 minutes.
My mother's brother, Elbert Wise, he was 6 or 8 years old, living there on what's the turnpike now, there across there in front of where the post office is. And their school bus was a wagon pulled by mules. So the school bus, I always think it when I see a big yellow school bus there going down through Oak Ridge when I'm down there. I said, my uncle and my family used to go to school on a wagon pulled by mules. And my Uncle Elbert actually fell off the wagon once, and it injured his leg so bad that he almost lost his leg. But he eventually went into World War II and fought in Germany through the Battle of the Bulge. And then when he came back home, he was trained on beach landings, and he was on a ship off the coast of Japan when the bomb was dropped.
Oh my goodness.
And they dropped him off at Bataan because they didn't expect it. Nobody knew about the bomb. So they dropped him off at Bataan with no supplies. And of course, Bataan had been stripped. And this is personal stories. This is not research I've done. This is family history stories I've been told verbally. So that's all I've got to say. So when you see a little Cialis school bus down in Oak Ridge, think of the old mule and wagon that used to pick up the children to take them to school.
Oh man, that's interesting. As you saw in the Robertsville history that Dennis Egert wrote, there were more schools around this area and of course we haven't even talked about the Wheat School and the colleges that were there. We did when Steve gave the presentation at our last session, but there were lots of schools located around this area, and many of them it's hard to find the details about them, but it's been turned up in some of the research that people like Steve and Ralph and Dennis have done over time. And we really, really do appreciate the amount of effort and energy, Steve and Ralph, that you all put into doing the research and bringing that information to bear. And I hope you all who are on the class with us today have enjoyed and appreciated what these two gentlemen have been able to bring to us. And I thank you for being here. I believe we're going to have another session in the next iteration of ORICL. This seems to be a very popular session, and I don't mind keeping it going. So if you want to do it again when the next catalog comes out, sign up for the next ORICL class, and I'll see who I can get to come and join me, and we'll bring some more little known and always interesting history about our area, our portion of East Tennessee. So thank you all very much for being with us, and have a good day.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
Yeah, glad to do it.
Thanks. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.